Nearing the end of World War II, the US gives the order to launch the first atomic bomb on Japan. Hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians quickly became victims of the war. Children, mothers, teachers, regardless of who you were killed. Those who weren't obliterated by the initial impact swiftly became lifeless rags of flesh or charred bones. Others who were far enough away from the hypocenter were cursed with the effects of radiation, all caused by one weapon: nuclear missiles. And with this, the story of nuclear tensions worldwide officially began. With the dropping of the atomic bomb, the USSR speedily developed its nuclear technology. It tested its first A-bomb promptly in 1949, quickly putting an end to the US lead. This rivalry between the two superpowers marked the beginning of the Cold War, which would continue for the next 4 decades. Not much later, the US tested its first hydrogen bomb in 1952, quickly succeeded by Russia in 1953. At this point, nations are fighting to develop and better their technology for a means of warfare. This is known as the arms race. However, this moderate form of rivalry quickly became heated when the US adopted the massive retaliation policy in around 1945, stating that any Soviet aggression would be met with an overwhelming nuclear response. It only got worse when in 1957, Russia launched the first artificial Earth satellite, the Sputnik, introducing new methods of delivering missiles and alongside it, new fears of nuclear warfare. With the division of Korea and East Asia, the USSR and the US once again found themselves on the brink of nuclear warfare. The Soviet Union occupied North Korea, while the US occupied the South. This separation was a physical reminder to both nations of their differences, which set the stage for further conflict. On the 25th of June 1950, North Korean forces invaded South Korea in hopes to reunify the nation under communist rule, striking the West and the UN as a significant concern. Both nations viewed this as an attempt at spreading communism, and so with this in mind, quickly came to the aid of South Korea. The UN was successful in pushing back North Korean forces. However, in October of the same year, China began its involvement in the war by deploying overwhelming amounts of troops in an effort to repel UN forces. With this, conflict became increasingly heated, and the US feared that nuclear involvement may be necessary to prevent further spread of communism in Asia. Throughout later years, although mentions of using nuclear weapons as a deterrent were majorly advocated for, it was decided not to use them. The UN, specifically General MacArthur, believed that it was the most effective and efficient resolution. However, the US now maintained a policy of nuclear deterrence, which suggested nuclear weapons only be used in the most extreme of cases. The war continued for a few more years when it eventually reached a stalemate between the border of North and South Korea, halting suggestions of using nuclear weapons. Although the Soviet Union wasn't directly involved with China or Korea, they were still aware of nuclear threats and monitored the US's use of nuclear weapons. And so, both countries settled down and conflict ceased, for now. Only a few years later, in 1962, the US discovered a Soviet nuclear facility in Cuba that was housing devastating amounts of nuclear missiles. This triggered the US, however it was still believed that peace could be reached without a militaristic approach. And so, a secret agreement was reached. The Soviet Union agrees to remove their nuclear facility out of Cuba in exchange for a pledge from the United States that they shall not attempt to invade Cuba. In 1968, the NPT was signed in an aim to diminish the devastating effects of nuclear warfare and to advocate for a more conservative solution to conflict between countries. The NPT, or the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, suggested nuclear disarmament and allowed nuclear energy to be developed for peaceful scientific uses. The signing of the NPT limited nuclear weaponry to the US, Russia, the UK, France, and China. In practice, this policy would effectively limit any risks of warfare. However, this did not stop India from developing and testing its first nuke, the Smiling Buddha. India was the first non-NPT nation to conceive nuclear weapons. With increasing tensions between India and Pakistan, India accelerated its nuclear research and quickly expanded. This startled the NPT and it questioned the legitimacy of the agreement. To make matters worse, India did not agree with the NPT, calling it discriminatory because it only included 5 countries, meaning that India was free of any bounds and could start conflict if they chose to. And so they did. India's nuclear test inspired other non-NPT countries to develop their own nuclear weaponry. Quickly, countries like India, Pakistan, and Israel were in their own arms race. With every passing day, threats of an all-out nuclear warfare crawl closer to our doors. Since these past events, nuclear tension has only grown worse and weaponry has been developed further. History truly is destined to repeat itself. But what happens when there is no human life left on Earth to look back on our history? What happens when a piece is knocked over and suddenly the world is in flames? Some say we live in a time of modernization and utopia, but I say we live in a time where there is a constant fear of war and death. And that is why humans are destined to fall.